I welcome you all back once again to my channel. So, in the previous episode, we have seen how to build a application that gives raw output like this. So, we were intending to display some text on our application. Okay, so I have made use of a widget called Material App for that. So, I have told you that it provides raw base for your application. Now, in this episode, we are going to see how to make this look a bit more elegant, and we'll be laying a foundation to build an application that asks you questions, okay, like multiple choice. So let's get started. In the previous episode, all we did is we made use of Material App widget, and in that widget we were passing argument called text to the home property of the Material App widget. Now in this episode we are going to make use of Material App widget because I told you that provides you the raw base. Over that we are going to make use of another widget called Scaffold. So the Scaffold widget, it provides you a bit more elegant looking appearance to your application. We have called upon for Scaffold widget. Okay, so now when you run your application, you could see the difference. Now you could see a new base for your application. Okay, in the previous version we had a black background, and over that background we displayed a text, but now after passing the Scaffold widget to the home property of the Material App, you could see a white background. So what we are going to do is we are going to pass another set of arguments inside the Scaffold widget. Okay, the very first argument is app bar. Okay, so we are going to pass some naming thing to this app bar. So for that we are passing another widget called app bar. Okay, so with to the property of app bar that is present in the Scaffold. So inside this app bar, what we are going to do is we are going to give a title for that. In order to give the title for this, we got to pass the text widget again, and in the text widget we are going to name it as sample application for now. Once you have named it, when you run the app, you could find that your application got an app title. So you saw that here. Okay, so we have given something called sample name as the title. So in order to give that title, we are passing the text in the text widget. Okay, and we are passing that widget to the title property which is present inside the app bar widget. We are clubbing this together, these widgets app bar, and passing it again to the Scaffold widget. Okay, through the app bar argument of the Scaffold widget, the property of the Scaffold widget, and in turn we are again passing the Scaffold widget as assigning value to the property of home which is present inside the Material App widget. You can understand that all these widgets are handled like in a tree structure. In Flutter application, all the widgets are arranged in form of trees. So you could roughly get an idea how the widgets are arranged hierarchically in this scheme. Very next thing is our next goal is to display some text in the bottom. Okay, so here in this white area. So in order to do that, we are passing another argument to the Scaffold widget. This time the argument is going to be body. In this body we can directly send the text. We are directly sending the text widget, and in the text widget we are printing our anthem hello world. Okay, so when you hot reload this, you could find hello world here. So now we have successfully created an elegant looking application when compared to the previous version that was horrible looking. So now our application looks far more good when compared to the previous version. So we have accomplished our initial goal successfully. Now the very next thing we are going to look on is to how to create a quiz kind of environment in this application. Just like a couple of questions, 2-3 questions. By developing that, we also try to learn some new concepts along with that. So let's get started. Now in order to create a quiz kind of app, usually in quiz what we got a question and we got a couple of options. Let's say this is a question. We pass text as question 1. Now what happens is if you try to pass some other widgets, pass something else, you will get error. It's because this body property of the Scaffold, it can hold only one widget. It can't hold more than one widget. So we have already passed the text widget that had the question 1 initially. Okay, so since we passed it, now the capacity of the body property of the Scaffold widget to hold widget is full. So in order to make the Flutter understand that we are going to pass so many widgets, so we are going to make use of concept of invisible widgets. So what these invisible widgets do is, it is also a widget, okay, but you won't be able to see that in the app display. Here you can't see the invisible widgets. We have visible widgets like text widget, okay, but the invisible widgets are not seen. That's why it's named as invisible widgets. So there are invisible widgets like column widget, row widget, containers. These are invisible widgets that helps you to arrange the visible widgets in such a fashion that you want to display it in the body of your application. Okay, so what this column widget does is it helps you to project the widgets in a column fashion. Okay, so you'll be able to project the widgets one by one below. In case of row widgets, it helps you to arrange side by side, and container, it just clubs the entire widget and you'll be able to position the widget accordingly. We'll see about the container widgets shortly. Now if you want to place widget one below the other, then you make use of column widget. If you want to place it side by side, then you make use of row widget. So in our case, what we are going to do is we are going to get a question, okay, and after that we'll be posting three choices, one below the other. So we are choosing column widget. In order to make use of column widget, let's take this text widget for now. We call upon column. This is how we call the column widget. So inside this column widget, let me auto format my code so that it's a bit more readable. Okay, so in this column widget, now we got to pass the other widgets, more number of widgets. So for that we have a property of column widget called children. Okay, so this children property of the column widget helps the Flutter to instruct that this particular column widget has some number of widgets that are going to be arranged one below another. You could see something called widget and it has this square bracket. So this means list. Okay, let's go into the concept of list very shortly and then come back. Lists are one of the cool features available in Dart. Okay, so what this list does is it helps you to club the data together. What do I mean by clubbing the data is in general we have different data types, that is integer, double and string. Okay, so you'll be handling data at times which are like mixture of all data types. List concept helps you to club your data together irrespective of your data types in the way you want. It helps you to present the data conveniently in easy handling manners. In order to define your list, that is a variable of type list, you will be making use of the keyword called var as usual to declare the variable. Okay, so you'll be giving the variable name, and here you'll be making use of square brackets. Okay, so you'll be opening a square bracket after equal to, and you'll be closing the square bracket, okay, in order to complete the list. And inside you can give a number of values you want, how many ever elements you want to add to that particular list, you can do that, and then you give a colon. So in order to give you a brief idea on how this list helps you, I'll give you one simple example. So let's take this example wherein you have some sequence of data. Okay, so one that is integer, then you got string, then you got double, then you got again an integer, then you got two strings. Okay, so if you want to club your data in a different way, like here, if you have seen here, you would be having integer and then string and double. So you are clubbing these data together, and again you want to club another three sets of data together. So this is just an example on how this list helps you to handle the data. Okay, so that's the list for you. Coming back here, we are making use of this list concept of the Dart. Okay, so we are passing some sequence of widgets in this children property of the column. So first we let us pass the text widget, okay, the widget that we used earlier to ask the questions, and we should also provide some choices, right? So in order to provide choice, we are going to make use of a widget called raised button. So this particular widget, it provides you a roving kind of effect when you move your mouse property over there. So I will show you while demonstrating this widget. Okay, so now let's pass this widget. Inside this widget we'll be passing one more widget, that is the text widget. So this text widget displays what you want to project in those options. So let's say answer one. Now before passing this, again what happens is this raised button has some property inside. Again, this is a class, right? In this class you will be assigning these value to child property of this raised button. Okay, so you'll be passing this text widget to the child property of this class. And now even though you have passed it correctly, now it throws you a warning because you have not provided the function for this raised button, what to do once the user clicks on that particular button. Okay, so for that you will be passing the function in another property called onPressed. Okay, so this is another property that is present inside this raised button widget. Okay, so here you'll be defining the instance of some functions that has to be triggered when the user presses on the button. For now, let's name it as null. Okay, so for now we no need to do anything when the user presses. First we want to get the output, so let's give three options below the question. Okay, so now what we have done so far is we have given our application a title, then after that we have asked the question and three options. We have given three options for that. So in order to do this, we have made use of the concept of list in order to provide more number of widgets. To range it below, we are making use of invisible widget column. Have done all these stuffs in the body part. Now when we hot reload it and when we see our application, we could see the result here. Now since we have not defined any function for that widget to do on press, so even though if you click anything in here, you won't be having any changes. Okay, so once we have defined the function to be executed here, okay, once we do that, we'll be looking at a difference. Now let's try to improve this application further. In order to provide some functionality to this on press, we got to create a method. Inside the class, when you create a function, it's called method. So in order to do that, I'm going to use the same syntax that I taught you in Dart language. That is what we do. First, we give our function a name. So let's say this function as function1. Okay, I'm giving sample name for that. We are going to make use of parenthesis and then open curly brace and close curly brace. So this is how you define a function. And now I'm going to give a type for this function. This function should be of type void. It shouldn't be returning anything. I'm giving a function here. Like I said, in Dart language, I would have told if you want to call the function somewhere else, you would be using the same name of the function that you have created, and then I would have told you to use pair of parentheses to tell your compiler that this one is a function. Okay, so what happens is if you use the same here, it will throw an error. I will tell you why. So usually what we do in Dart language, when we make use of this function, the compiler compiles everything on screen. Okay, so in the background while executing, it's not like reactive kind of thing. So what we should do here is when the user clicks on that particular button, then this function should be executed, else we no need to have that function to be executed. But here what happens is when you make use of this parenthesis, the function gets executed even though if the user have not interacted with that button, raised button. So it should not be happening. That's why you get the error here. This error is a good message for us because it tells us shouldn't be written like this. Here the function should be called like this. It's like pointing the instance to that function. This function will be executed only when interact with the raised button. Now in order to structure the function such a way, you won't be making use of the pair of parentheses here. You will be just mentioning the name here. To give you a better understanding, we can see the same in the Dart language. So let's say I'm creating a function called in function1. Okay, so let's say this function is returning value 1. I'm doing this for sample. Okay, so we are creating a main program as well. In the main program, let's say we print this function. What happens is in the first case, when we print this function, it returns value 1, so it gets printed and you see what happened. So I've named the return wrong, so that's why I get the error. Okay, so what happens is when in the first time when you run this function, you get the value 1 in the console. So you could see that here. If you don't make use of this pair of parentheses in here, when you run it, it will be the closure of the function1, meaning that it's all the values and the properties that are present inside the function, it's all bundled and it's like you're pointing instance to that bundle, something like that. So that's why it's defining here as closure 1. So that's what I'm trying to convey here. Here all we need to do is point out the instance of that function. The function should be executed only when the user interacts that particular button. So in order to do that, you just got to point out the function. You should not instruct your Dart SDK to execute it right away when it's building. So it shouldn't be like that. So that's how it should be returned. So now let's say we pass all these functions like this. Okay, so now when you hot reload it, you could see a rovering effect. Okay, so when you click the button, you could see some kind of rovering effect in here, right? Okay, now it's visible for you. Okay, so this is what I was talking about, one of the features of the raise button. So now it's working. So next what we are going to do is we are planning on getting questions in list and try to change the questions here whenever we answer one question. In order to do that, let's create a variable. Okay, so in order to create the variable, we are making use of the keyword called var, and let's name our variable as questions. Okay, so after that we got to give some sample questions inside. For that we are making use of this list concept by opening the square brackets and closing the square brackets. Inside let's give 2 questions. Okay, now I got to tell one another thing. What if you want to print a quote inside? Okay, so let's say in a scenario where I'm asking question, I got to print this quote inside. But what happens is the moment you enter the quote, parser recognizes that the string is over and the stuff that you enter later, it's not considered as string. So how will you tell your parser that this should be considered as string? For that you make use of backward slash. When you make use of backward slash, then that special character will be treated as a string, a normal string. All special characters can be printed in string. Okay, so in order to do that, you make use of this backward slash. So now you can ask question. Well, let's say, what's your name? Okay, so all these questions are just for sample. Okay, we are learning concepts right now, basics of Flutter, and we make use of this comma to add more and more items inside your list. Now we have entered 2 items inside our list. The very next thing is we are going to access that item by using the variable name. Okay, so in order to do that, you can call the name of the variable, that is questions, and then you can make use of the square brackets and enter the position where you want to access. So in this case, I have entered 0. What do I mean? Usually when you number some list, what do you do in real life? You started from 1, that is 1 2 3, like I have entered inside the text. But in programming language, the numbering starts from number 0. So this list contains elements from 0 to 2, that is 0 1 2. In total it has 3 elements, but the numbering starts from 0. This is important, so remember it. If you enter 3 here, okay, so when you enter 3 and when you try to execute this code, it throws you range error, that is you are trying to access some element that is not present in this list. So you will be getting such errors. So you should be careful. You should remember that the numbering starts from 0. So if you have in total 3 elements, then the number can range only from 0 to 2. Okay, that is one value less than the total number of elements present. Okay, so you got to remember this. There is also another way to access the elements present inside this list, that is you can make use of utility function. Okay, I'll show you. So in order to access the elements present inside the list in another ways, you can make use of the dot operator, and then you can make use of a utility function called element add. Okay, so what it does is it helps you to access the position of your list. Okay, let's say you want to access first position, that is you enter 0, so this shows you the same. This is to give you an idea. Now again, when you compile this code, you would be seeing the same thing. If you are, let's say, accessing second position, that is number 1, then when you hot reload it, you could change the question. So now it's asking with number 2, what's your name? So we didn't change anything here, right? So everything is same. In order to give you a difference, let me ask, what's your age? What's your favor? Now when you hot reload the program, you could see the difference. So now the output is changed. Now you get what's your age, and when you change it to number 3, now you are trying to access something that is not in this list. So you will be getting some range error. So this is what I was talking about. Now you got a range error that states that invalid value not in range 0 to 2. So that's what I was telling you. If you're trying to access something which is not in the list, you will be getting that error. Okay, so you could see the difference for yourself right now. Okay, so if you are inside the limit, then you will be getting the output as desired. Let's look into the difference between stateless widget and stateful widget. So far we have been making use of a widget called text widget that is so frequent. So that comes under the stateless widget category. Let's see how it comes under the stateless widget category. So usually what is a widget? Okay, so you got something like a widget. It gets some input that we give or some other widget give to widgets. Widget gets input externally and it processes the data and produces relevant output according to the data that you give. In here, every widget have something called internal state. Let's take our text widget for example. So the internal state, that is the purpose of the text widget, is to display something on your application interface. So it's like just like printing. So that is the internal state of this text widget. So what this text widget does is it gets input from us, it gets the string and it prints the string. Okay, so it prints the string according to the string that it gets, but its state of printing doesn't change. So here the internal state of the stateless widget don't change. That is, you can't make this text widget to execute some other function apart from displaying the text that is a string on your application interface. So that's why it's called a stateless widget. Now in case of stateful widget, that is the custom widgets that we create, as usual it gets the input to the widget and it gives you relevant different output, but here the internal state of the widget changes. Let's take our quiz application itself as an example. Like I told, in Flutter everything is widget. Okay, so your entire application will be considered as a widget. So what we are trying to do is we are trying to display new text on the place of question. So everything is a widget, right? So we are changing widgets. That is, if you're asking one question, question number one, what's your name, that is a widget. And when you are asking another question, that is what is your age, that is again another widget. So you are trying to change the widgets, right? So that is like changing the internal state of the overall widget. There the internal state is considered as changed. So you will get detailed idea when you work on the application. So this is the overall view of a stateless widget and a stateful widget. So I told you something called a state, that is generic for stateless and stateful. So this is like you extend a class called state when you try to implement stateful widget. Okay, so that is like it stands common between stateless and stateful widget. You can't directly define a stateful widget like you do in stateless widget, wherein you make use of the extends keyword and then you extend the stateless widgets feature. That is, you inherit those features. You got to create a new class and you got to extend that class with the stateful widget. Okay, then you'll be extending the state class to the class in which you got to create the stateful widget. So we will be seeing about that shortly. So this is to give you a brief idea on what is stateless widget and what is stateful widget. Our next goal is to make sure that whenever we click on these answers, the question should change here dynamically. So we have been changing the position here, the questions were changing accordingly, but next our motive is to make sure whenever we click on one answer, the question here should change dynamically. This involves changing the state of this entire widget. That's what we are going to see here. So this warning, I will explain this warning, why we get this warning once I explain you the stateless widget. Okay, so let's hop on to the stateless widget. So first what we got to do is, since we are incrementing the number here, that is the roving from 0 to 2, okay, 0 1 2, we are making use of a count variable. For that, let's declare a variable. For that case, I'm making use of variable name count, and what I'm doing is I'm using the variable here. Whenever this variable gets incremented, it moves. Okay, so the position changes. I'm assigning the counts value as 0. By default the value will be 0, but in case, in rare occasions, some junks may get in. Usually we don't have that problem in Dart. Just for safety, I'm declaring it as 0. Our next motive is, even now we won't be able to change the state. So let's say whenever we click on the button, raise button, this function gets triggered. If we increment the count here, even if we do that here, when you run the application, since we are trying to change the state, we got to run the application completely. Once your app gets installed and once your app runs, even now when I click on the button, even though I click on that, the value should increment behind, but I'm not getting the change in here. So that's what I'm saying. Since the widget is in stateless condition, you can't change the state of the widget. So in order to get the state of the widget changed, we got to convert this entire widget into a stateful widget. Here, in order to declare this widget as a stateless widget, we have extended stateless widget, but if you extend directly to stateful widget, it won't work. Okay, so it throws you some error. You could see that here. So that's not proper way of extending to a stateful widget. But what we can do is we can extend the stateful widget in a separate class. And so let's give this a different class name and let's extend this to stateful widget. Okay, so now what we are doing is we are extending this to state. Okay, so that is generic between stateless and stateful widget. So we are handling both stateless and stateful widget. So this is how you got to declare stateful widget for a particular widget which you are developing. So we will be making use of these open and close angle brackets. Inside this bracket, we will be giving the name of the state which you extend as stateful widget. Now you are establishing a connection between this class which extends the stateful widget with the class which you are currently working on. Now in order to create the state for this widget, that is my widget change, what we got to do is we got to make use of a function called create state, what this function does is by default, if you're making use of Android Studio, you could see that this has taken stateful widget, which is being inferred from this, that is the extends and the type of widget that you are extending to the class, that is a widget that you are making. So that's how it's inferring. So you are trying to define a separate class to create a stateful widget. So that's how this should be considered. Since this is a method and this is of type state, you got to return a state, right? So what we are going to do is we are going to return this widget to this create state. So if we do that, now you have correctly established the link. So you are returning this widget here. This creates a state for this widget, and that state is the stateful widget. That's how you establish the link. But even now, if you run this program, you won't get any change. Okay, so now since we are changing the state of the entire widget, so we got to run this application completely right from start. So even now, if you click on this link, you won't find any change here. It's because we are not setting the state. Okay, so in order to set the state, what we got to do is there is a function called set state. So this helps you to set the state of your stateful widget. So inside that, if you increment, whenever the value changes here, the state of your widget will be set. So now when you run this application right from start, when you see that when you click on this, now you could see that your name, age, color, all the questions are changing in here. But now since we are in third question, when you click once again, you get this range error because we are trying to access an element that is not present here. So we are not controlling the count variable in here. So we got to control it. So for that, what we can do is we can condition this. So in order to condition this, I have told you a condition if clause back then. What we are doing is if this count variable is less than 2, okay, so it can increment, else this should remain count 2. By giving such condition, I have told you about if and else while I am talking about the basics of Dart, right? So this helps you to control the incrementing process of your count variable. So now restart it so that you could see it from starting. So now when you try to increment this very first time, you could find what's your name. Okay, so let's click one. Now the state of the widget is changed and it's asking what's your age. And now when you change it again by clicking one of the answer here, now it's asking what's your favorite color. Now once again when you click it, it don't change. So we have successfully controlled it. So this is how you create a stateful widget, and this is how you control your count variable in runtimes. This is to give you an idea. So now our next motive is to do the same thing. We are printing this, but what we are doing is here we have been making use of text widget, right? So we are going to create another widget in another Dart file, and we will be importing that to this Dart file and making use of the widget that we have created. So in the widget we are going to create, again we are going to make use of the stateless text widget, but we are doing it by creating our own widget and embedding the feature of text widget inside, and we are importing our widget to the native, that is a main.dart file, and making use of that here. So in this process you will learn how this import actually works, how to create our own custom widgets and import it to our file when we are working in the projects. So that helps you to reduce number of lines of codes in your main program. So it gives you much more elegant look, that is much more readability.
Before moving further, I got to tell you one more concept, that is declaring the class as private. So there is something called private and public in class. So usually when you define a class, it is public by default. In order to help you to understand this bit more, I'll give you a simple example. In real life, when you work in a project, you'll be developing multiple files. In here, you'll be having multiple Dart files in your library. Okay, so in such scenarios, each file may be interdependent on each other. That is, you might access some functions or methods that you have defined in some other file or some program that's been written by some other programmers who are working along with you in some big project. There are scenarios where you want to prevent the access of specific class in order to avoid bugs when we work in group projects. So at that moments, you got to declare your function, that is your class, as private. So by declaring your class as private, what happens is it makes sure that it is a dart file, that a class which is declared private will be accessed only by the dart file within that class, that is can be accessed only within that dart file. It can be accessed by other dart files, that is the programs outside of the dart file in which the class is being written. I will explain you how to do it, and I will also give you an example so that it will be a bit more clear for you. So how to define a class as private is, it's very simple. You will be making use of underscore. So very first time when you see the sample app, you might have seen this underscore slang of mentioning the name. So very first time when you see that, it might have sounded like a fancy way of giving names to the class or variables or methods, but it's not. So this underscore has a purpose. It tells your Flutter SDK that this particular thing should be treated private. It can be class, it can be a method, it can be a variable within a class. So in order to tell your Flutter that that particular thing is private, you make use of this underscore. So when you introduce this underscore to some entity within the program that is present in one dart file, you got to make sure that you reflect the changes to every other places where that particular entity is being used. So in this case, I am willing to change everything to private. I'm changing each and everything that I see. I'll change one. I'll also change the variables. So when you change the variable to private at one particular place, it shows you warning in several other places where you have made use of that variable. So you got to make sure that when you try to change something to private, you got to reflect it to all of the places where it had been used. So that's important. So in order to help you to understand this, until before, when you try to change your class to private, you would have not seen any warning in here. Okay, so if you are giving the class name as something else apart from my app, when you're creating very first time, you might see the error in test file. Okay, so the Flutter SDK has an auto generator test file. Okay, so in that it will be having a name called my app. Okay, so I've changed it to my widget. Okay, so what happens is the moment I change my widget to private, you could see the warning here that this is not defined, meaning that the dart file couldn't access it. So it cannot identify. So this is an external dart file. So in this test dart file, what we were doing is we were trying to access a widget from the main dart file, and we were making some testing things to pass value inside and get output. So we were doing that, but now we have made it as private, so this test dart file is not able to access it. But if you make it as public, that is like it was before, for instance, let me change it and show to you once again. If you do that, you won't get that error. So now we have changed it to public. Now the moment you do it to public, you could see that this thing is recognized in here. You don't get any error. So that's what I'm saying. There are times wherein you got to make sure that the classes that's written within one file, it shouldn't be accessed by other files. So in order to do that, you can make that particular class or entity private, and in order to do that, you make use of this underscore. So this is one important concept that I want you all to learn. And the second thing is that, as usual, other ways of defining the function. So I'm going to teach you one concept called anonymous function. So in this application, what we have done is when we press that button, we call upon a function. So in this case, all we have is just one function. Okay, so we have been inferring that again and again. So we have given name for this function. That is one other way of defining what to do when that button is pressed. That is in order to define a function without giving a name. So this concept is called anonymous function. In order to write something in this way, what you got to do is you make use of pair of parentheses, you make use of equal to symbol and then angle symbol. Then after that, you make use of pair of curly brace. Okay, so inside this, whatever you want to do, okay, no matter how many number of lines it may be, you can add it in here. So if you add it in here, it will work. Okay, so this is one other way of defining the function without mentioning the name. This is called anonymous style of writing. So in this case, we have some number of lines of code. So we have made use of this pair of curly brace, that is opening and closing of curly brace, that acts as the opening and closing door for that statement of execution. If all you have is just one statement, okay, let's say like our main file wherein you are just calling the run app. Okay, so in that case, you can write just in the same format. Okay, let's say if you want to make use of just one function or one widget. Okay, so in that case what you can do is you can make use of this pair of parentheses and equal to an angle bracket, and then you could directly call whatever you want to do if that's the only thing that particular anonymous function got to do. So in that case you can define it like this. This is another way of defining anonymous class. But if you have some number of lines of codes, then this is the only way of doing anonymous class if you felt like that particular function will be called only once. And in that situation this method will be efficient, else declare a separate method and call it whenever you want. So that reduces the number of lines of code of that particular application. So these are the two concepts I want you to learn. So next, let's look on how to create our own widget and how to import it in our class and try to replace the text widget here.
So now let's create our own dart file. Okay, so like I said, the library is a place where we'll be working and we'll be creating multiple dart files throughout this course. I want to create a dart file. Let me name the file as custom widget because we are going to create our own widget that again does the printing function by making use of the text widget. It's a dart file. I'm creating it. So once I created it, it's done. So here we are not going to write any main program. So main program will be only in your main function. So here, since we are just creating some custom widget and we are going to import it, all we're going to write here is just the class. We will be making use of the class and write some widget and then import it. In order to create our own custom widget, all we, as usual, will be making use of this import thing. Okay, and we'll be calling the package, Flutter's default package, and we'll be making use of the class keyword. Let's create our own custom widget. Let's name it as question. So what we are planning on is, what we have done here is we got the questions here and we were printing it in the text widget. We were passing the questions to the text widget and that was changing over there. So what we are going to do is we are going to get the questions as arguments in our custom widget. That is, we are going to place it here. We will be getting it as argument and then we print it here. That is, make use of the text widget and display it here. So that's what we are going to do right now. So let's name our class as question, and since this has only one purpose of printing, that is displaying our text, we are extending it to stateless widget. And since this is a widget, we got to build it, right? So we are making use of the build function. This helps us to build. So this is of type widget, right? So we got to return the widget and we are returning text widget. Now in order to get the data from external sources, we make use of the constructor. I have taught you the basics of constructor while I was teaching you the basics of Dart. So this how you declare constructor, and since all we got to do is just getting one variable, what we assign value to one variable, that is a string variable which holds the question. So we are directly assigning it to the question. This is the property of this question class QSN. Okay, so now what we are doing, we are just printing it here once it's done. So now we have created our own custom widget. What we have done is we are getting the question from the external source and we are assigning it to the property question, that is, which is the property of QSN class. Okay, so we in turn, after assigning the value to the property question, we are printing the text widget that we have called here by making use of the default package of Flutter, that is material.dart file, which the programmers have already written. Okay, so now we are going to try to import something that we have written ourselves to the main.dart file, like how we make use of the files that the programmers have already written. Okay, so now we are going to make use of the import keyword. So in order to import the Dart file which is present in the same folder, that is in this case we have created Dart file just in the same folder, that is library, right? So in order to tell your Flutter to search it in the same place nearby, you make use of dot and you make use of /, then you call your Dart file. You have named the Dart file as custom widget, right? So custom widget dot. So once you name it, okay, so when we try to change text widget to our own custom widget, let's say we are changing it here. Okay, so we are accessing QSN. When the moment you enter Q, you could see our own custom widget that we have developed just now popping up here in the search results. So that's the proud moment using our own custom widget. Technically we have just made use of the stateless widget that came inbuilt, but this is to help you to understand how to create our own widget and use it in other Dart files. This is just for your knowledge. let's just change these values here. Let's not disturb the text widget that is present in other places. Okay, so now when we run this program, if we got the same output as before, then we are successful. The change here is we have made use of our one widget. Let's see. Yes, we are getting everything as usual, which means our function is working perfect. Okay, so that's good to go for us. So in the next video, we'll be looking on how to customize this text widget a bit more, and we'll be looking further to develop our application greater looking and help you to understand the design scopes that are available. I will be teaching you the concepts of container in the next video, so stay tuned.